The third chapter of Bava Metzia dealt with the responsibilities of a custodian. And the fourth chapter, which we're going to begin today, deals with transactions, with buying and selling, how we transact. And we're going to see that just as the third chapter mixed, let's say, legal exactitude with principles of how we behave, maybe going beyond the boundary of the law, so does this fourth chapter. And we're going to begin by learning a verse from which everything else is going to be derived. And we'll see, by the way, that this verse as well combines legal issues and ethical issues, as if the Mishnah, when it combines these two types of issues in its voice, the Mishnah is already picking up a mix, an integration that is sitting there in Torah. So as far as Torah is concerned, law and ethics are inseparable. They go together. And that is reflected in the Mishnah as well. And in fact, this chapter of the Mishnah, which begins with quite legalistic material about essentially how we transfer title to different objects when we complete a transaction. It begins with title transfer, but it moves very fast into overcharging, and not just overcharging in money terms, but verbal, let's say verbal, you could call it oppression or extortion. In other words, we can hurt someone not just by overcharging them in money terms, but by using words. So we'll see this idea that ethics and law combined runs right through the fourth chapter, and it begins in this verse from which much of the material in the fourth chapter is derived, from Vayikra, from Leviticus. We're in chapter 25, verse 14. And the verse says, V'chitim karumim karla amitecha. When you sell something to your neighbor, when you sell anything that you sell to your neighbor, or kanor miyad amitecha, or when you buy something from your neighbor's hand, al tonu ish et achiv, you shall not wrong one another. Now, there are two ideas which the rabbis are going to pick up from this verse. The Mishnah and the rabbis are very, very close readers of text. Or kanor miyad amitecha, when you buy something from your neighbor's hand. One of the principles we're going to learn is that title transfer, certainly over movable objects, happens when the buyer takes the object that he's bought in his hand. He has to pull it towards him. In other words, title transfer happens when his hand seizes the object and takes it. At that point, the deal is sealed. And at that point, he's bound to hand over the money, whether, even if he has not already handed over the money, he can't retract. The act of picking up the object transfers title in a way that handing over money, by the way, does not transfer title. Taking the object into your hand, miyad amitecha, that transfers title. And then at the end of the verse, al tonu ish et achiv, you shall not wrong one another. We're seeing the integration of law and ethics, and we'll see it develop through the chapter. Let's jump now into the Mishnah. Hakesef koneh et hazahav vehazahav eino koneh et hakesef. Silver acquires gold, and gold does not acquire silver. We don't really understand this Mishnah, and to make it more confusing, there are two versions. The one I've read to you is in the Jerusalem Talmud and in the Kaufman manuscript. But in most printed editions, it goes the other way. Hazahav konet hakesef, ve'hakesef eino konet hazahav. Gold acquires silver, but silver doesn't acquire gold. And we still don't really understand what is going on here. So perhaps we'll just leave these two versions of the Mishnah for a sec and learn the rest of the Mishnah and perhaps the words of the following Mishnah, which explain it. And once we understand the whole pattern, let's go back to this first line, which appears in two opposing versions. So let's keep going for a sec. Copper acquires silver, but silver doesn't acquire copper. And the sense is that, as we've said, when you buy something, you acquire it. Title transfer takes place when you hold it in your hand, when you pull it towards you. Now, if you're trading with a money changer and one party is maybe selling copper coins and the other is paying for them with silver, well, which of the two objects, the copper or the silver, which of the two objects affect title transfer? If I'm trading copper for silver, does title move when the buyer of the copper picks up the copper? Or does title move when the buyer of the silver picks up the silver? It's not clear. But the principle we're going to run in the Mishnah is that generally the common currency is, so to speak, the payment for the object, and the less useful or the less common currency is the object being transferred. And remember, we've said that title transfer occurs when the object is seized. So in this example of copper and silver, the copper is the object, the silver is the common currency, and the copper is the object. So when the Mishnah says, we're saying when the buyer of the copper picks up the copper and moves it towards him, at that point, title transfer occurs. And the silver is then due to the other party. Regardless of whether the silver has changed hands or not, the silver is due at the moment that the copper is picked up, because title transfer happens when the copper is picked up. And we'll see this play through the rest of the Mishnah. Let's keep going. Ma'ot hara'ot konot et hayafot, v'hayafot einan konot et hara'ot. Bad coins acquire good coins, but good coins do not acquire bad coins. So we might go to a money changer to exchange some rubbish coins. Maybe they've been defaced, maybe they've been clipped, maybe they're old and the issuer, the stamp is no longer clear. I mean, anybody familiar with archaeology is familiar with bad coins, and you can hardly see on this coin who the issuer is. The assumption in the Mishnah is that bad coins, something you trade away to a money changer, but you trade in exchange for good coins. So the transfer of the bad coin here is the object. Once the buyer seizes the bad coin, the money in exchange is due. Ma'ot ra'ot, the bad coins, konot et hayafot. The bad coins acquire the good ones, because as soon as the bad coins are seized by the purchaser, the good money is due. Let's keep going. Asimon konet hamatbea, a blank coin, an unminted coin. An asimon, it's right now in modern Hebrew, it's a telephone token, but in Mishnah, it's a blank. It's an unminted coin. So again, it's not good currency. Not good currency. Asimon konet et hamatbea. Blanks acquire minted currency. The minted currency doesn't acquire a blank. The blank is the object being traded. So as soon as we pick up the blank, the money is due. And now let's make it more general. Hamitaltalim konim et hamatbea. Movable property. This is any kind of movable property. It could be a chair in your house. The chair, konim et hamatbea, movable property acquires coin. If you're buying a chair, when you when you put your hand on the chair and you draw it towards you, the money is then due. Title transfer has taken effect. And it doesn't work the other way. Coin doesn't acquire movable property. Just handing over the money doesn't entitle you to the chair until the point when you put your hand on the chair and draw it towards you. And the Mishnah closes ze haklal kol hamitzaltelim konim ze et ze. This is the general rule. Types of movable property acquire each other. It's the movable property that acquires, not the money. So now perhaps we can understand these two versions of the Mishnah, of the beginning of the Mishnah. So the printed version, the regular printed version says, Hazahav konet hakesef. Gold acquires silver. In other words, silver is the common currency. Gold is something you'd never play around with, really. It's like walking into a bar and trying to buy a drink with a $100 bill. The barman, well, certainly in previous years when a drink only costs, less than $1, the barman would throw you out if you try to pay with a $100 bill. Same with a gold coin. We don't use gold coins in regular commerce. So the gold coin has the status of property here. Hazahav konet hakesef ve'hakesef eino konet hazahav. Gold acquires silver and silver doesn't acquire gold. And this is the text normally found in printed Mishnah. Kaufman, by the way, is different. Kaufman says, and the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud says, hakesef konet hazahav. Silver acquires gold. Gold does not acquire silver. And we seem to be running a different principle here. Similar but slightly different. Hakesef konet hazahav, silver acquires gold. We seem to be saying here that the gold is the common currency. And the rationale seems to be that gold is more valuable. That a more valuable currency is more of a common currency. So if we're looking at a scale of values, rather than saying, oh yeah, no, gold is not useful for coinage because you can't in practice use gold in the marketplace, we're saying, gold is actually more valuable. So it has a higher status than silver. And so we can say, hakesef konet hazahav, when you grasp the silver, it affects title transfer over the gold, because when you're trading gold for silver, the silver is actually the object being traded and not the gold. And this idea, by the way, is explained in the Yerushalmi that points to these two versions. Let's have a look at the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. Hakesef konet hazahav, etc. Silver acquires gold. Yeah, this is the version in Kaufman and the version that is not found in our printed texts. And the Yerushalmi explains, Zehu klalol shel tava. This is the principle of the matter. Kol hayarud michavero konet chavero. Anything that's worth less than the other acquires the other. The less worthy stuff acquires the more worthy stuff. In other words, silver can acquire gold. And now we can see, of course, a blank coin will acquire a minted coin. A defaced coin will acquire a minted coin. Copper will acquire silver, and so on. So this principle works for the whole of our Mishnah, but it only works for the Kaufman version of gold and silver. And it's under dispute. Let's keep going. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi said, Man Tanita, who said this? Who said this principle? And he answers, Rabbi Shimon ben Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon ben Rebbe. Rabbi Shimon is the son of Rebbe, and Rebbe is the editor of the Mishnah. This principle is said by the son of the editor of the Mishnah. Let's keep going. Amarle Abuhi, his father said to him, i.e. Rebbe said to him, Chazor bach v'tani kahada. Change your opinion and teach it the other way. Turn yourself around. Hazahav konet hakesef. Gold acquires silver. That's the version we have in our printed Mishnah. Gold acquires silver. Amarle, he said to him, this is his son speaking to his father, Leina chazarbi da'ad hava chaylach alayich itne alayich at nitani hakesef konet hazahav. He said, I don't change my opinion. I don't change it. Da'ad hava chaylach. When you were strong, when you had your chayil, a strong woman is an eshet chayil, a man of war is a ben chayil. Hava chaylach, when you were strong, i.e., when you were in full possession of your faculties, when you were in your prime, at nitani, you taught me. Akesef konet hazahav, you taught me silver acquires gold. So we have two versions from effectively two ages of Rebbe, once when he was in his prime and once when he's old. And the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, concludes, Milte de Rebbe Amra, the word of Rebbe implies or says, Zahav kafeirot, gold is like produce. In other words, the gold is what you buy, the silver is the common currency. Matnita, the Mishnah, our version of the Mishnah in Kaufman, Amra says, Kesef kafeirot, the silver is like produce. In this case, the gold's more valuable. If you're paying gold for silver, you're buying the silver. So both versions are valid. And both versions of the Mishnah seem to come from Rebbe, the editor of the Mishnah, but they seem to come from him at different times. And somehow one of them is in the Kaufman manuscript and in the Jerusalem Talmud, and the other one is in most of our printed manuscripts today. The Mishnah then explains this a bit more. Sad. How does it work? What is this business about produce? Mashach mimenu perot velo natan lo ma'ot. He pulled the produce away from him, i.e., the buyer drew the produce away from the seller. He picked it up with his hand. Remember, the verse in the Torah says hand. As soon as he's picked up the produce, eino yachol lachzor bo. He cannot retract. The deal is done. He owns the produce. And it doesn't work the other way. The Mishnah continues. He gave them money. He handed over the money, but he didn't pull the produce away from him. He can retract. And perhaps even both sides can retract. I mean, he can certainly retract by asking for his money back, but the seller might retract as well just by taking away the produce. So the deal is not done yet. The money's been handed over. The deal is not done. Aval amru, but they said. So we're going to see now that halacha in its broadest sense is more than just law. It's more than just law. Aval amru, but they said, Mi shepara me'anshe dor hamabul, he that punished the generation of the flood. This was the generation that saw evil going on around them, but they just didn't protest. Out of that whole generation, only Noah was the only one who was saved. They just didn't protest. Even it looks even as if Noah didn't protest. So it's not as if it's as if they didn't trouble themselves to get involved in society. They didn't. Perhaps they kept themselves to themselves and kept the law, but they didn't go out and fix society. They didn't go out and protest. They didn't take it upon themselves to go out and correct what was going wrong. That's the generation of the flood. He that punished the generation of the flood. Will punish someone who doesn't stand by his word. So yes, perhaps in pure halacha you can get away with not standing by your word, but be aware that he who punished the generation of the flood will punish someone who does not keep his word. And then Rabbi Shimon concludes, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol kesef biyado yado le'elyona. Rabbi Shimon says, he who has the money has the upper hand. And we don't fully understand what this means, whether it's someone that has the money in his hand, but has not yet consummated the transaction, perhaps has the right not to. I'm not sure. But the principle of the Mishnah is clear, that it's taking the produce that transfers title formally, but informally, we keep our word. Jews keep their promises, regardless of whether title transfer has taken place.